Hi, I'm Old Norse specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. I teach at the University of Colorado Boulder, previously at UC Berkeley and UCLA. In his prose Edda, the Icelandic scholar and chieftain Snorri Sturluson describes Loki as an os, that is, a member of the most dominant family of gods in Norse mythology, the Asir, the singular is os. But in spite of calling him handsome, most of his words for him are negative. He calls him Inslugi os, the sly god, and Rogberi osana, the slander bearer of the gods. And in the poems of the Poetic Edda, preserved from an earlier century than Snorri's writing, we have similar descriptions. In the poem Volsbá, he is called Lagjarn, deception, yearning. Just like in Humiskvida, he is called Lavis, deception, wise. So we have a figure who, while considered divine, is also very troublesome and definitely associated with being insincere. His parentage is interesting. His father is said by Loki to be a jotunn, or giant, named Þáttr. That means dangerous striker, roughly. Keep in mind that jotunn, or giant, is not a description of some kind of giant blue people, but just of a rival race of divine beings to the gods, who are related to the gods by marriage and often by descent. And his mother is said to be a woman named Laufey. That means leaf island, roughly. Now, Laufey is said to be an osinja, that means a feminine os, a member of the Asir, in a thula, which is one of the mythological lists that are sometimes preserved in appendices to manuscripts of the prose Edda. And we can also infer that she was one of the Asir, since Loki is counted as one, and you wouldn't be one of the Asir unless one of your parents was. So this is interesting because even though many of the gods are the products of Asir men mating with Jotun women, Loki is the reverse, the product of a Jotun man and one of the Asir women. This may be part of why he is known as Loki Laufeyjarson, Loki's son of Laufey, his mother, rather than ever being called Loki Þáttr, because his mother's status is higher, and so he chooses to be associated with her. Brothers are mentioned, one named Buleistr and one named Helblindi. Helblindi could well be an Odin name, since it means hell-blind, and that has the ring of an Odin name about it, since Odin names often refer to his one-eyedness. We know, thanks to the poem Lokasena, in which Loki insults all the gods, that Odin and Loki are blood brothers, that they blended their blood long ago, as Loki says to Odin in that poem, and that they swore that no drink would ever be served to one of them that wasn't served to the other as well. This is presumably why Odin keeps Loki around in Asgarðr, the realm of the gods, at all. Another reason, of course, why he may be known as Laufey's son, by the way, is simply that it alliterates with Loki, and Norse poetry is alliterative, so having those two L's gives you automatically basically a line of poetry, whereas, of course, Loki Þáttr doesn't have any alliteration. Now, sometimes Loki is helpful to the gods. In the poem Thrymskvida, he goes as a willing aid to Thor, to Jotunheimr, in order to retrieve Thor's hammer, which has been stolen by Jotnar, giants. But sometimes he is just straight up browbeaten. For instance, there is a story where Odin, Loki, and the mysterious figure Hunir are traveling. And they stop for an evening and they cook a steer that they've killed, but the meat won't cook. They look up and they see an eagle in a tree above them, and they wonder if that eagle is the reason why the meat won't cook. And it turns out that this eagle is in fact the reason it won't cook. The eagle says, "Yes, I won't let the meat cook. I'll use my magic to prevent it cooking unless you give me my fill." Well, the traveling gods agree to this, and the eagle starts eating, but eats so much that the gods get mad, and Loki swings a stick at it. But the stick sticks to the eagle named þáttr, and Loki is flown up into the sky, hanging on for dear life to this stick that's glued to the eagle. And the eagle says that he will only let Loki down if Loki will promise to get Idun out of Asgarðr. Idun is, of course, the goddess who keeps the apples that the gods eat in order to remain young. So Loki promises to do this. He goes back to Ósgarður, and with a promise that she will find even better apples if she steps outside of Ósgarður's walls for a little while with him, he lures Idun out. At this point, þáttr, in eagle form, swoops down, picks up Idun, and flies away with her. And of course, pretty soon, the gods start to get old. And so they browbeat Loki into going to figure out some way to get Idun back. Loki borrows Freyja's falcon skin, which apparently turns him into a falcon, or at least gives him the power of flight. He also uses it in Thrymskvida and in the story of Geirröðin. And he flies over to Jotunheimr, where þáttr is out fishing at the moment that he arrives. So he goes down to þáttr's hut, picks up Idun, who turns into a nut, and he flies back like a hazelnut, and he flies back to Ósgarður with her in tow. þáttr follows after, but the gods have a fire or a pile of kindling ready, and they set fire to it as soon as þáttr flies over the wall, and so they kill him. And I know this kind of sets up another story where Loki is sort of helpful, but is also just plain an object of fun. Skadi, the daughter of þáttr, shows up and demands compensation for the death of her father from the Aesir. And they agree to terms that she will marry one of them and that the gods have to make her laugh. Well, she ends up marrying Njordr, which is another story, but it is Loki who is charged with making her laugh, and what he does is he ties one end of a rope to a goat's beard and the other end to his own testicles, and then they play a little tug-of-war. And sure enough, Loki ends up losing, and so he collapses squawking into Skadi's lap, and Skadi laughs. So that is just straight up, humor. We also see a sort of humorous side of him when the gods are contracting a certain Jotun smith to build a wall around Ósgarður to keep other Jotnar out. It is Loki who gets them to agree to let the smith use his horse, Svaðilfurri, to help him out in making the wall. But the gods have to promise that they will give this giant not only the sun and the moon, but also the goddess Freyja, if he succeeds in making the wall within the amount of time that they've specified. If I'm remembering it right, I think it was 1.5 years. Well, the night before he's about to finish this project on time, the gods get mad at Loki for having been the one who convinced them to let him use his super strong horse. And so Loki has to come up with some idea for how to get this giant to fail to build the wall in time. And so the next day, the giant is out with his horse, and they're collecting stone. The horse is apparently pulling a wagon, and this horse is a stallion. And a mare trots out and presumably neighs seductively. And Svaðilfurri, the stallion, upon, quote, realizing what kind of horse this was, broke out of the reins and chased after the mare. And it is from this that Loki becomes pregnant and will eventually give birth to Sleipnir, Odin's 8-legged horse. Another story where Loki is a little bit of an object of fun and kind of just browbeaten by the gods into doing what he wants to do is the story of the Brisingamenn. Now, the last two stories that I mentioned come from Snorri's Prose Edda. The story of Loki and Idun comes from the part called Skóldskaparmál, and the part about the giant builder and the horse Svaðilfurri comes from the part called Gylfaginning. Well, this story actually comes from the manuscript Flateyjarbók from the expanded edition of Ólafssaga Tryggvasonar, which has a lot of þáttr, little short stories, some of which are mythological, and this is a mythological story called Sorla þáttr. In this, Freyja is walking along and happens to see some dwarves, 4 dwarves, working inside of a rock making a golden necklace. She wants the necklace and she offers them money and treasure for it, but they say, no, all that we want for it is you. Give each one of us a night with you and we'll give you the necklace. So Freyja agrees, but Odin finds out about this and he tells Loki that he wants Loki to go and get the necklace from her. But Freyja lives in a house that no man can enter, So Loki turns into a fly and he buzzes all around the house looking for anywhere there's a draft, and he finally finds a little spot big enough for him to fly through where the wall meets the roof. He flies through and finds Freya sleeping in such a way that the clasp of the necklace is under her. So he turns into a flea and bites her so that she'll turn to where he can get the clasp, turns back into humanoid form, unclasps the necklace and brings it to Odin, who then makes various demands of Freya to make her, for her to get it back. Of course, this necklace is the Brísingamen, her famous necklace, and there is a hint in one Skaldic poem that Snorri cites in Skóldskaparmál that once Loki and Heimdallr actually fought over this necklace in the form of seals. Unfortunately, that story is not preserved in its entirety. But of course, Loki is probably best known for his dark side. In the poem Lokasenna, he kills a servant of the god Ægir, or well, Ægir is also in origin a Jotun too, but he's sort of the god's host. He's the one who hosts their big feasts. He kills a servant just because some of the other gods are praising the servant, and according to that poem, Loki hates to hear servants praised. He also boasts in that poem that he is the reason that Frigg will never again see her son Baldur, most beloved of all the gods. And of course we know that that is true because it is he who puts the spear into Hothr's hand and causes him to kill his brother Baldur, according to the legend of the death of Baldur, told also in the Prose Edda. And Loki is a major figure behind the events of Ragnarok. Depending on which source you read, whether Lokasenna and the Poetic Edda or the Prose Edda, Loki is punished for one of two reasons. According to Lokasenna, it's because he insults the gods. According to Snorri and the Prose Edda, it's because of his involvement in the death of Baldur. And his punishment is that he is forced to watch as his two sons, Nari and Narvi, are turned into wolves. One kills the other, and then the intestines of the slain son are used to bind Loki to rock. And then a poisonous snake is placed over his face by Skathi, incidentally, who he once made laugh, and the snake drips poison onto his face. His wife, Sigyn, sits next to him and catches that poison in a bucket, but every now and then she has to go and empty out the bucket because it gets full. And when that happens, of course, there's no bucket to catch the poison, so it falls on Loki's face, and he struggles, and that's what causes earthquakes. Well, whether this punishment is for insulting the gods, as Lokasenna says, or for the death of Baldur, the fact remains that Loki will break out of his bonds made from his son's own intestines on the day of Ragnarok, and he will lead the Jotnar and monsters against the gods. He himself will fight Heimdallr, according to Snorri, which is interesting because of the hint that we have in that one Skaldic poem that they once fought over the Brísingamen necklace. So there may be some older rivalry there, which may also be referenced by the weird insult that Snorri gives to Heimdallr in Lokasenna. He's the only god that the insult doesn't really seem quite right as an insult. He just insults him for having to stand up all the time, which may refer to his position as guardian of the gods, but it may also be a reference to a story that we've lost. Of course, Loki will be killed at Ragnarok, as will all of the other gods and most of their enemies, except a few gods who survive, weirdly enough, in Hell in the afterworld, like Baldur and Hothr, who will come back after Ragnarok. But other major participants in Ragnarok will, of course, include Loki's children with the Jotun woman, Angrboda, right? Sorrow offerer is more or less what her name means. For almost all of the stories that survive from the Old Norse period about Loki, see the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda. My translation of the Poetic Edda has been available since 2015 from Hackett Publishing Company, and my translation of the Prose Edda will follow in a few years, possibly in about 2021. I'm also going to post the Sorla þáttr, the story of Loki retrieving the Brísingamen from Freya, as a bonus on my Patreon page. My Patreon page is a big help to me and has been a great community of supporters, and I thank all of my Patreon supporters, and I encourage you to check out Patreon if you haven't yet. For now, from beautiful Colorado, I'm wishing you all the best.